guys. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to this Yale Ciencia Academy Conversations with Scientists. Today, we are going to be discussing funding. So we'll be talking about fellowships and grants, as well as practical strategies and advice that can help you as graduate students be successful in the process of securing funding. I want to take a minute to excuse Giovanna, who is attending a meeting, as she's not going to be able to join us, but she said hello and she'll miss you all. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. We're really fortunate to have these three wonderful panelists who have a diversity of experiences, and I'm sure we'll be providing you with some really great advice. So first, we have Dr. Mariano García-Blanco. He is a professor and chair of the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the University of Texas Medical Branch. He is also a professor at the Duke NUS Medical School in Singapore, which is a joint venture between Duke University and the National University of Singapore. And Mariano's research focuses on RNA biology and virology. We have Dr. Michelle Jones-London, who is the chief of the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity at NINDS at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. There she directs a variety of programs and training and workforce with a particular focus on diversity. And then later in the conversation, we will have Dr. Paola Giusti joining us. Paola is a research assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she uses functional genomics and genetics to understand psychiatric disorders. Today we're going to be talking about funding, which is it's something that everybody is interested in. We need funding to get our science done, but it's also an important experience that as graduate students you should be thinking about developing your abilities to get funded, to write grants. It's something that's important for your development as a scientist. So I'm actually going to have our discussants for today. Let's see, where are you guys? Rebecca, Nicole. Who would like to get started with the first question?
So I can go ahead. Hi, everybody. As Monica mentioned, my name is Nicole Rosa, and I'm a rising second-year grad student at Yale University. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question. So as Monica mentioned, funding is a very important part of our lives as scientists, and it's very important for us to get funding early on. So what would you say are the key characteristics that reviewers for grants and or fellowships look for when reviewing a research proposal, and what would you say are the most important parts of the application?
You want me to go first, Mariano?
Yes, no, please,
Yeah, go for it.
please go ahead.
So I think first of all, the thing that goes across mostly all grants, fellowships, all funding opportunities is they're looking at you, they're looking at the mentor, the environment, and they're also looking at the research. And when people say, well, how do you weight all of these characteristics? I think a lot of it depends on where you're at in terms of the training. So, for example, we just revamped our NINDS F32 program so that the eligibility is for someone that's a year before they're about to start the postdoc, or only a year once the postdoc has begun. So you're talking about someone proposing research for their postdoctoral experience very early on, before they've ever, in some cases, gotten to the actual lab. And so there, the criteria is really going to be looking at the person, right? The potential for that person to do the research, and what is the productivity been of that person so far, and then also the mentor. Do they believe that the environment is good? So all of those things, but they're going to weigh that a little bit differently than you would say for an F31, where someone has been in a graduate program for maybe 3 years, and therefore the expectations are that you're going to have maybe some preliminary data. So I think it all depends, but those are the three biggest characteristics: you, the person, the mentor / environment, and the research.
Yeah, so I completely agree, and I'm glad that NINDS has done this, because I feel that it's important to get people to get these fellowships early in their careers. I don't like this idea of very long postdocs. This is not the topic tonight, so I won't divert. But I think we need to get you guys out to start your independent careers as early as possible. And I love these programs that move money and support for early. Let me tell you my experience, not my own experience because it was too long ago, but my experience with postdocs who have come to the lab. That is that in my view, I'm going to recapitulate it. You mentioned, Michelle, you mentioned productivity. The science that you have produced will be huge. And I don't mean numbers. I mean the quality and impact of the papers that you have written, the letter from your advisor, from your PhD advisor, saying this person had one manuscript and that was a critically important one. I personally care less whether it's in Cell or PNAS or Journal of Virology, more than it has the high quality rigor, and it is actually going to impact the field. And then number two, and I'm again repeating Michelle, is the mentor committed? Does the mentor have a track record? Just like you have a track record, does a mentor have a track record? Now that is tough for young investigators, right? How do you develop a track record of teaching? And there's where you see the young guys. I mentor my assistant professors to join forces with more experienced faculty and co-mentor students, postdocs when they come in. So I think that really I am essentially echoing what Michelle said in terms of your science first, your track record, the track record, your mentor, and that will make I'm talking mostly about F32s, postdoc fellowships.
But I think you're right, even for the F31s, and you mentioned a point that I didn't mention, and that's the references. And I think that was one of the questions here, or maybe not, but that really, in terms of the application, that's something that's really judged and people read into them very heavily, sometimes maybe even more than they should, right? Because someone could be just not an effusive person. And so when they say someone's great, that really means that they're, a rock star, but maybe that's just not their style. So the onus is on you to, when you ask people to write you references or recommendations for these applications, is to really convey and get a sense of what their support for you really is. That you don't want to go after just big names because you feel as though, the reviewers will see this name and they'll be blown away and they'll think I'm a good scientist too. You don't want to play those games. You really want to choose someone that really can speak to your strengths and could sell you to the reviewers. And sometimes you just have to be very blunt and ask someone that, do you feel like you could give me a very strong recommendation? Because a lukewarm one will give the viewers concern, because this will be someone that they know perhaps in the field, and they'll say, well, such and such seem kind of iffy on the person, even though I like what they're saying in the application, this kind of dampens my enthusiasm a little bit. And so you don't want that to be a concern. So
while we're on that topic, I'm going to jump right in and ask a question that's related. So one thing that I've heard regarding the letters of references is comments from the reviewers being like, oh, why didn't you ask this person for a letter of reference? And in particular to the younger students here in YCA, for example, myself, I'm a rising second year, as I mentioned. So I'm in the position, okay, I've already selected my thesis committee. I have the PIs that I've rotated with that can vouch for me. But there's people that have known me for longer and that have made excellent letters of references for me. So how do I choose between who I know now and who I've known, and how will that impact my application?
I mean, I guess the answer for me would be that I would use a mix. You can show your past and your present at the same time. I wouldn't choose all past. I would choose, people that are currently working with, and you can also choose people that perhaps have known you longer. Make it a mix. What do you say, Mariano?
I agree. I think most important is they need to know and understand your science. Because they, I have to admit, I've gone through the whole review process at NIH, but mostly reviewing R01s all the way to council and GM, not an NINDS. So, but I haven't reviewed applications for fellowship, but I've had many fellows in my lab, and I can tell you that the letters that impressed the reviewers were the knowledgeable ones, the ones that knew the individual well and knew their science. And that is I would say that that's most important, because
they tell you.
Absolutely, and that comes through when you read the letters. Is this just a template that the just got printed in, or does this person really care?
Yep.
And yeah, Michelle made a very important point, which is the styles of personality styles, and this affects grant review all the time. You effusive versus non-effusive, but people get to know styles, and I think that the knowledge of you and your science is most important.
Yes.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could comment on how the students can be proactive in helping the people that are writing their references. I think the students need to be proactive in thinking about who they can select as referees and writing them letters, thinking about who knows their science best, and who can really speak very highly of them. But these people are busy, or if it's somebody that maybe you haven't worked with in a few years, what can students do to be proactive to help to ensure that these letters are as excellent as they need to be?
You want to go first, Michelle?
You go first this time.
Okay, so I'm going to use a historical anecdote to answer your question, Monica. And I'm going to go to Nicole and say, when I was at Yale eons ago, I worked for a guy called Peter Lengyel, right? But I actually, as a student, interacted very, very heavily with many faculty. George Miller, Joan Stites is the best example I can give you. Joan has been an advocate throughout and a mentor throughout my career, although we never formally had any connection. Why? Because I went to her and I said, I have these questions, I have these problems. I have these issues that you're an expert in. And so as a student, you're a colleague of the faculty. Go to their offices, make appointments, interact with them. They really feel and they know you are the colleague. So I would say the more you interact with faculty other than your PI, and there's where PIs have to be completely open about this. I tell my students, I want you to contact as many faculty as you can, and it doesn't have to go through me as a PI. It should be the student interacting directly with the faculty members and asking questions, posing problems. The faculty actually love to do that. It's a lot more fun than going to a faculty administrative meeting, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and you speak like one advice that was given to me when I was in graduate school is that you build your relationships for your references a long time before you need them, right? You can't build the relationship for the excellent reference a week before you need the reference. And the other thing is about staying in touch with the people that you have built past relationships, right? So a lot of, I'm sure a lot of people on this call today have done summer research opportunities as undergraduates or even maybe postbacks. And so it's really nice to just send that email and keep in touch with people and say, hey, just want to say I'm doing this and I'm doing an abstract at such and such a place, or I'm presenting this poster, to keep them abreast of your research and your activities, not only because I'm sure they still feel vested in you and it's a point of pride for them, but it also helps when it's time for you to ask for that recommendation. It's not this cold call of, well, I haven't talked to you in a year. It feels, I'm sure they'll still do it, but it's a different ask when you've been keeping them abreast all along, right? It just feels different.
Okay, so there's funny that you mentioned Joan. She's actually my PI.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Please give her a hug for me.
I will. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next question. Another comment that I keep hearing from my peers that have already applied to grants such as the NSF GRFP is that commenters or reviewers say that their proposal is, quote, too ambitious. How do you think we could avoid that? And what exactly is an too ambitious proposal?
Can I make an off-the-cuff comment here and off the record?
Yeah.
What you need to do with that is,
this, so there's no off the
I know
record.
you're recording it. I'm not going to use these 4 letter words. I feel like using them. My feeling about it is what you need is good reviewers, not slackers. If they were good reviewers, they would almost never use that criticism. Let me be quiet and let Michelle say something rational.
No, I would say that truly having an overly ambitious project never kills a grant application, right? Because if reviewers feel like what you're doing is truly worth funding and is innovative and significant, they may feel like it's overly ambitious, and I wonder how this person is going to get all of this fabulous stuff done, but they'll wave it away. So what that hides behind is maybe sometimes code for it seems scattered, it seems too diffuse, it doesn't seem tight enough to match with the training plan. It doesn't seem like this person really has an understanding of what it's going to take to get this project done. And so I would be careful and I would advise that person to always read further into the summary statement. And in this case of NSF, I think they call them something else, to see what is the real message that they're sending. Because sometimes reviewers do, I think, with a good heart, they try to use different code words instead of just spelling out what the real problem is. Because I find it, like you said, I find it hard to believe that someone won't fund something because it's too much of a great thing. They just wouldn't.
Ditto. I agree with you 100%. I think that the one thing I would say for you guys is never send an under-ambitious proposal.
Yes.
But I think that Michelle hit it on the head. They're probably not saying what they really mean, which is this proposal is unfocused and you'll never learn about A because you're doing A, B, C, D, and E, and F. And that they should really say it like that. And you want to learn from your reviews, right? So you want to get it as blatantly as you can get it. But
all right, Diana has a question. Diana, do you want to go ahead and share your question?
Hello.
okay.
So Hi, so my question is not like related to funding, it's more like references. I've questioned for a long time, and I currently have a good relationship with my advisor, so it's not something that concerns me. But I always want, like, what is worse, a weak recommendation letter or like no recommendation letter at all? For example, I have a friend, she had a very bad relationship with advisor. She like never asked for a recommendation letter because it would be just terrible. So I kind of always wonder like what was worse, like a weak one or just not having it at all.
No, that's a tough situation, right? But having no recommendation letter from the person that you're currently working, well, obviously for the fellowships and stuff, your references can't be your mentor. So that wouldn't apply to that. But I guess you're talking about in other situations when they move on and say they're writing for a postdoc and they don't have a reference letter from, say, the PhD advisor. It's going to be a red flag. And so you could handle it one of two ways. If the relationship was just really, really bad, I mean, and that happens, and that's not so unusual that reviewers in the room can't understand that. What I've seen work successfully for others is that the current person in the lab or the mentor could perhaps mention it somewhere in a, in a very discreet way. Or I've seen it such that someone else, maybe someone who was also on the mentoring team at that university that that person was at, could say, even though Ted didn't have the best of relationships due to personal reasons or, just interpersonal dynamics, they still managed to successfully complete their project and was still integrated in the university team and, go on and like, put it out there. Don't go into the dirty laundry, but just put it out there. And then reviewers will say, oh, that's why they don't have a letter from, Bob. And, and like and all things, everything else being equal and the productivity is there, you can still get beyond that. But just not mentioning the elephant in the room is just never a good strategy. And it's amazing how many people do that, not only about issues like that, but even productivity issues. Like if there's a CV and there's a gap of 3 years and the person just doesn't say, or there's this, this productivity where the person, as a graduate student had produced 3 papers and now they're a postdoc and they've been in the lab for 3 years and they've done nothing, but not nothing, but there's no papers. People, like I said, these raise questions. So instead of the person saying, something we were working on ran into some issues. And so although I don't have publications right now, we're working to, you can put it in a narrative form or have the mentors put it in a narrative form. But it's always good to not leave the reviewers guessing and to use, I would say, also the biosketch strategically, because right now in the personal part at the top of the biosketch, you could talk about other issues that may have affected productivity. I mean, we're all humans. We all have, believe it or not, lives outside of the lab. People get sick, people die, people have children. There are all types of reasons for why a timeline could look a little bit perhaps different than expected. And so, using the biosketch to sort of give that narrative for why something isn't what people would assume it should be is a good strategy.
Michelle, I agree 100% with you. First, take the bull by the horn, face these things and openly discuss them. And number 2, I want to emphasize, I'm a chair of a department, so not only do I have my postdocs, but just last month I had to write a letter. So there was a conflict, a personal conflict between a postdoc and their mentor. And he wasn't going to get a letter from his mentor for postdoc number 2. He was going to a second postdoc. So I looked at his publication record. He had been quite productive. So I could write and say, there is a conflict here. And what I suggested to all of his potential future advisors was that they discuss with his PhD mentor for, real tech. I couldn't, he was a bioinformatician. I couldn't really technically opine on his abilities, but I could actually say there was a conflict, and that's why there is not a letter from this person. So I think that the more open you are, so I'm recapitulating, openness is better than anything else.
Yes.
I want to bring that Manny made in the chat. Manny, do you want to share? Because this is very relevant to the conversation we're just having.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, every time I hear the word productivity, I cringe because what if your productivity has suffered due to your mentor who didn't mentor you? And so it's held against the student, because that's a very real experience of mine and of other people that I know.
Yeah, and it's hard sometimes. I mean, the number one thing that pops into your head is there a possibility to remove yourself from the situation and to move to another lab? But that's not always realistic, and that can't always happen. And so I guess the second thing is sort of what Mariano, alluded to, is looking outside of that lab to maybe help ameliorate some of the bad, talking to the chair, talking to others around, just so that you're not suffering in silence, and that what can be helped can be helped.
I got into a new lab a little over a year ago, so I'm in a much better situation. It's just it takes so long to produce a whole new line of research and then collect the data, analyze, and publish. And this is the time that I need to be applying for like F31s and so forth.
Right.
And so I have all this work on my CV, but then I don't have, where are the publications to back this up? So that's, and so you can't get into, you want to avoid the drama, the starting fires, but it's a sticky situation. How do you say, well, it was my mentor. It was the person.
That's always, I think, going back to what Michelle said, for somebody thinks it's better if others speak for you. You put it out, you put it in your bio schedule, say, things did not work out in this lab. I moved to another lab, and that has created a gap in my publication. You can leave it very neutral, but then your thesis committee or other members, the director of your graduate program, your chair, they can comment. Now, it depends on the situation. They may say, well, Manny just didn't produce, and that was it. You can talk to them before they do this, but many times, and I've heard this often, a student saying, I put the first draft of the paper in my mentor's desk a year ago, and he hasn't done anything with it. And that clearly is a mentor problem. And that is where your thesis committee, your chair, director of grad students, you have a lot of allies who will actually, and they may mentor this individual, he or she, your previous mentor. That's no way to go. You do this often, and you're never going to get another graduate student, and it doesn't help anybody. So let others do some of the more
the heavy lifting.
The heavy lifting and the more difficult phrasing for that.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. So my name is Rebecca, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Puerto Rico Medical Sciences campus. I'm about a year to a year and a half left of my PhD, and I really want to go into a postdoc by getting my own funding. But my question is, at what time point should I do that? And if it's something that it's expected of me to do by myself, like the proposal, or do I have to talk to a possible mentor for my postdoc that would help me guide my proposal into the area that they're most interested in?
Yeah, and so it depends on what FOA or what mechanism you're applying to. And so through neuroscience, you would have a few options. So I don't know if many of you on the call have heard about the NIH Blueprint F99K00 DSPAN Award. Anybody nodding? I didn't have to put it on screen view to see all the nods. I see a few, so I'll go with that. So this is a program that provides funding either 1 to 2 years while you're at your pre-doc phase, and then up to 4 years for your postdoc. So it's an F99, the pre-doc phase, and then K00 is the postdoc phase. And to me, it's a really exciting program because it has this transition award that really empowers you to then make decisions on your postdoc, not just around who has funding, but who can give you the best research experience that you're looking for. And so we just recently had a round of awards or review of applications. We haven't made decisions yet, but we just released a notice talking about that we plan to reissue this mechanism. And I believe the due dates for the grants will be December. I have a lot of mechanisms floating in my head, so you'll want to go online and double check me on that, but I think it's December. And so that's one. So there you're really writing the application with your current graduate school mentor. And the K00 part, the postdoc part, is in the future, and it's expected that what you're writing there is just broad strokes, but you're not writing about a specific lab or a specific university, but you're just writing about what you hope to get out of your postdoc. The other thing that I've already mentioned is the NINDS F32 that you could start writing before you actually physically get to your postdoc. It's a mentored award. So of course for that, you're going to have to identify your postdoc lab and your postdoc mentor and work with them to help you put the application together. But that's also a very good test of the relationship before you get there, right? Because someone that's really invested in you and has you coming into the lab, of course, they're going to see this as a positive, that you want to write this and bring the funding with you. And so you'll have to identify the person before you start the F32.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on it from a PI perspective, from what I expect of the postdocs coming into my lab. And it's more of the traditional F32 approach, right? And in fact, if you're a US citizen and you apply to my lab as a postdoc, I essentially require that by year 2, you actually get your own funding. I think it's a terrific thing to do. It helps you, it helps the lab, Now, the level of engagement that there you'll find a whole different set of styles. I tend to believe that really you should prepare this proposal. And what I usually do is, we discuss the general ideas. These are the great questions in the field. These are the ones that we can work on. And then you really set out the proposal. And what I do is I don't say, no, don't do this experiment, do that one. I say, are you sure? Have you thought about all the puzzle? Because I want the student to really be the one that thinks about how to develop the science. Now, obviously, if I think there's something flawed, I would say, I'm very concerned about this particular part. But I tend to be a little bit on the extreme laissez-faire side. Other mentors are more engaged in the tweaking of the writing. I tend to believe that these are really your exercises, and the NIH should see your thinking and your writing, because writing is one of the critical skills that's being tested here, right? And that you have to be good at it. You have to get really good at writing it. they call expository writing, right? It's writing where you are proposing, you're trying to convince someone to do something, right? Either vote for you or give you money or accept your paper.
Yeah, selling your science. Yeah. And so I agree with that. And I think reviewers look at that, right? If it seems like it's a cut and paste of your mentor's R01, then it's not an individual award. That's a supplement. That's not an individual award that you have ownership of. But at the same time, like Mariano said, you're going to look at it. And if there are things in there that, you know, any person in the field would like clutch their pearls if they saw that, what they'll say is, did the mentor even read this? Are they even involved with this person? You know, so there's that fine line, right, between, you know, giving someone their own wings, but also not just throwing them out of the tree so they can fall on their face.
I wanted to call on Bianca. I think she has a question about this funding mechanism or related to this funding mechanism. Bianca, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, as was mentioned, my name is Bianca, and I go to Vanderbilt University, and I'm really interested in the blueprint diversity mechanism that you talked about, Michelle. And since you mentioned that this is the first round of applications, I thought about applying this year, so I'll be a fourth year, but I just kind of wanted to wait and see like how it went with the first year of applicants, and and I guess I just wanted your opinion on what you felt like made the strongest applications, because part of why I was hesitant was I think I've just now finally decided where I want to go for a postdoc, and it's going to be what I want to do is going to be completely different from what I'm doing now. So it's like trying to figure out how to write that when I'm still not 100% certain. And I like that you said that it was like, you know, what you want to gain from your postdoc, but in that regard, it's like, you know, obviously everybody's going to want something different. So what do you think make the strongest sort of arguments for that, and how do you convey that even though your pre-doctoral study focused on more basic science, that in your postdoctoral study you want to do like a complete 180 and do more application? I mean, like, how does that convey in an application?
I think it conveys fine, and I think that that's normal, right? I don't think that people expect, you know, your graduate experience is growing and learning and getting an amount of expertise in a certain area, but what you leave with is a set of skills and a knowledge base that you could move to other areas, and you should be growing and also incorporating and learning new things, right? Because that's what makes it a continuation of the training. And so I think just articulating that is fine. No one expects you to stay in the same exact area and then move that necessarily into a postdoc. The only thing that the Blueprint DSPAN requires is that it still be within neuroscience. That's the box, that's the restriction, is that it has to still reside within the NIH Blueprint research areas. But beyond that, within the applications that we saw, people were very well trained in, you know, molecular types of research and experiments, and wanted to use that to build upon behavioral experiments. And so they articulated how they were going to identify individuals and a research experience within the postdoc that would allow them to use what they already knew, but to expand upon that in the behavioral research world. And so that's perfectly fine. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. So, okay, so then for those applications that you saw, I guess, what do you think made them the strongest?
I mean, that comes back to the first question. It's the combination of the things. It's the person, it's the research, it's the productivity, it's the mentor. And the other thing that I tell people is that it is not a secret what reviewers will be using as the review criteria. It's in the FOA. And so, if you go to that section 5, and just read how they'll be judging you and compare that against what you've written, and have you addressed it, being really honest with yourself and going through it and saying, if I was a reviewer, would I be able to find that information? Did I spell that out? Was I very clear in addressing all these questions? That's what they're using. And so to me, I thought applications that did probably the best were ones that really made sure that they addressed all of those points. And applications where the reviewer said, well, they really didn't address this, or for the K00, they put like 2 sentences, they fell apart. And so they didn't have the information there.
So I have another question. And so I applied for the F31 last year. And one of the critics that I got was that my PI won't have funding for like starting now. So, and I know the other graduate student in my lab is struggling a lot with that, to receive funding when your PI doesn't have funding. And I think it kind of creates like this vicious circle that you're trying to get external funding in order to get your project going, but they won't give you money because your mentor doesn't have funding. So how do you bypass or try to solve this, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard because reviewers will be concerned that the research, because of course an F isn't going to fund the research. It's really taking care of you, your stipend, but it won't cover really all of the research itself. And so what the reviewers are looking for is some assurance that the lab is going to be there for you when you get the NRSA or the award. And sometimes they can be comforted by the fact of an institutional or a departmental letter saying that, regardless of the funding situation of the PI, XYZ University will commit to funding and taking care of Rebecca's graduate experience until she finishes, or something like that. Or there could be departmental funds there that maybe the reviewers don't know about, but you can provide a letter stating that the funding is going to be there. But if it isn't, then it is just going to be a concern.
Yeah. So, Michelle, I completely agree, and that this is something we deal with, and obviously as the funding has decreased in the last 10 years, I can't remember now how long it's been.
Been a while.
This is something that both as a professor and as a chair, I lose sleep over this, Rebecca. This is, because you want to have that departmental. Now, not every university has the luxury to say every student in good standing will be supported. So one of the things that we're doing now is, making absolutely certain that the mentoring committees, this is something that precedes, it won't help you right now, but it will help students coming forward, and you can advise your young colleagues that it is critically important that the lab be intellectually capable of sustaining you, but it's also important that it be financially capable of sustaining you, because as Michelle said very well, if there is no funding for the research, you won't be able to do it, right? So and we're guiding our students very carefully on who they should rotate with, and it's sometimes a very painful thing to do, but it's the reality, and it's a reality that I think we as faculty need to work with you guys when you're starting to decide, and these are the realities of who really can support you both intellectually as a mentor and financially. And that financial responsibility for one's students is critical. Every faculty member has to know that that is a very, very serious covenant you make. So there's no easy solution, Rebecca. You're facing a very difficult, and it's not a unique situation. It's very, unfortunately, it's happening a lot, and the NIH is doing a lot now to try to help the younger people who it was happening more, the younger PIs, right?
I wanted to call on Manny. He has another question about the Blueprint Award.
Okay, I'm in a clinical program, and I'm in my final year, but then I have a year of internship after this year. And so should I wait to apply for this Blueprint Award? I have neuroscience training, so it fits my interests and my skills. But I'm gonna have a year in between when I finish the doctoral work and when I'm out of stock.
So you'll have a dual degree program?
No, it's just a for clinical licensing. You're required to go after you finish your PhD work, then you have a year of internship, clinical internship.
We'll talk offline. So when there's cases where you won't go all the way through, before I say just no, I think we should see your situation so you can hear me.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Okay, great. So my name is Natalie Fuentes. I'm a rising third-year student here at Penn State College of Medicine. So I saw that Dr. Jones is from here. I don't know.
Well, not from there.
Okay, graduated.
I'm from Philadelphia. No,
Exactly.
no, I take Penn State.
Yes, I just saw that in your biography. So I was very excited meeting you. So recently I had the opportunity to talk to my program director from NIH, and I know that Dr. Mariano commented something about it, but how does having a young PI actually affects my chances of getting a fellowship? And what can I do to increase these chances?
And so it was really interesting because today I heard a talk from someone who's at NSF, and they were saying how an increasing majority of people that get their funding tend to be in labs with assistant professors. So like that's the culture over there. I would say that a lot of NIH review panels, the culture is that whenever it's a young investigator, and I think Mariano talked about this beautifully, there's this thing, they ask you for a track record. It's like, well, how do I get a track record if you won't ever give me one student? And so I think the way that people handle this very successfully is by partnering and bringing on people that are more senior, perhaps people that they're already collaborating with, or people that are within the university or nearby, and getting them to also, co-mentor the student. And what that turns out to be is it's not only good for the application, but it ends up being really good for the student. And that's sort of the flavor of mentoring now. We always talk about mentoring teams, mentoring circles. Having more people in your network that care about you and can be references for you is not a bad thing. And so the strategy of putting a co-mentor on, but a real co-mentor, right? Someone that's going to provide a letter and information and a bio sketch in the application that makes it clear to the reviewers that they are sincerely engaged and that it's not just a pass through for, let me get this old person to put on the application. That, it has to be real. It has to be a real agreement. And I like Mariano said, a covenant, that they're going to also agree to care about you, take care of you, and help to mentor you.
Yeah, very little to add. I think that that is, at the end of the day, reviewers are going to look at your application, and if they're excited about the science, and you and the mentor have really explicitly acknowledged, the guy or the woman who's your mentor says, I'm young. I have only had one other grad student. This is true, but look what I'm doing. I'm putting this committee together, and we have a content expert. and look how exciting the project is. You know, you talk to the reviewers, and it most of the time it works. They actually sense when it's real. They really do. When you sit in a study session, you realize how seriously people take this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not a perfect system, but it's the best system that I've ever seen to evaluate anything. So, you know, it is, and let the science drive you. If you're most excited about a young PI, then by no means divert because of worries about that. Go to that PI and let her or him guide you, and you can discuss these things with them, you know? So.
Great. So I also have another question. So I'm right now in the middle of my comprehensive examination. So I just submitted my actual proposal yesterday, and my oral exam is next week. So I'm like in the process of studying and making sure everything is okay.
What are you doing in this conference? You should be studying. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I actually have all the PowerPoints there and all the papers.
Development, that's important.
Oh yes, that too. Yeah, I'm also working on that. So I basically wrote the proposal by myself because we are not allowed to have the help of our PIs or our committee. So in terms of submitting this to an F31, so how much participation should we expect from our PIs during the writing process after I already finished with my exam process?
Well, I'll let Michelle give you the NIH version. I already mentioned that it varies tremendously from PI to PI, the involvement. I gave you my philosophy, which is essentially that you really have to have a complete first draft. You have to really, after some discussions about what the aims are going to be, you know, but it really has to come from you. At least that's how I feel it should be. And, you know, I think there are some NIH rules that very clearly say it cannot be a copy of your advisor's grants and stuff. But so I think but the styles will vary significantly from PI to PI. But I'll let Michelle tell you more about the NIH.
No, I think it's exactly the same. Like you said, these are individual awards, and this should be coming from you. But there is an expectation that your mentor is going to read it over and give you guidance, not write it, but to give you feedback.
Great. And one last question. So,
Natalie, can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
A great resource is in the lab that you're either the lab that you're going to write the fellowship or the lab that you're in, if it's an F31. Senior students who have gone through this or senior fellows who have an F32, you know, I encourage my students and postdocs to distribute their fellowships and have a lot of feedback. And many times they actually have like a little group meeting. They go to defend their fellowship in front of I usually don't participate to make sure that it is, you know, theirs. But the other fellows and students get together, and, you know, those guys are actually rougher than I am.
I would say they're usually more hypercritical.
But it's a great resource, and you can invite other labs to also participate, you know, other people who have the experience with these fellowships.
Great, thank you for that. So one last thing, we always hear about NIH, but I know that there's also some grant from NSF. So what would be the differences between submitting a grant to NIH versus submitting a grant to NSF?
We agree not to talk about each other. No, honestly, I wouldn't be the person to tell you, because just like us, things are always changing. And so I try to make it a rule not to give out bad information. So I don't feel comfortable enough.
It's a hard one. I agree with you. You know, I've been in a medical school all my career as an independent investigator, so I usually go to NIH, right? But you know, again, there's where the experience of the PI and the department can guide you and see, you know, they've had grad students who've done very, very well with NSF, and that I would, you know, use your colleagues as great resources to see what has been successful before. If they've applied 10 times to NSF and they always get the same letter, you know, this is too medically oriented, then that gives you a little message about where you may be at that. But it's a hard one. So my experience has been mostly, I mean, Actually, I don't think I get, I've had NSF equipment grants, but never fellowships, all NIH or other fellowships.
Yeah, so
I mean, NSF definitely has wonderful opportunities. HHMI has had some great innovative awards out there too. And so the message is that all money is good money. And so, you know, look far and wide. Don't only look at the NIH, look at NSF, look at HHMI, look at foundation awards. There's Epilepsy Society, or I think it's the association or something like that. But there's a bunch of diseases that also have different foundation awards that give money and focus on training. So really,
that's a very good point, Michelle.
Diversifying your portfolio of money is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can comment a little bit on the NSF. So when I was a graduate student, I was actually a GRFP fellow. So I had the NSF graduate research fellowship, but I never actually applied for the NIH. I think, I mean, the application and the requirements have changed a bit since I applied and received this fellowship. I got this fellowship in 2010. But, you know, in general, the NSF is funding much more basic research. I mean, they fund in not just biomedical sciences, but when it comes, in my case, I'm a neurobiologist by training, so my work was in biomedical sciences, but it was very much basic research. The NSF is not as interested in funding research that is applied. But in terms of the structure of the fellowship, the GRFP application, you know, the statement, like the research statement, when I applied was 2 pages, and I don't think that has changed that much. The actual structure of the application is quite different. You know, the National Science Foundation has actually broader impact, is something that is very important in their evaluation of fellowships, and that's not as explicit when you're applying to NIH fellowships. And so there are differences, but I think this question is actually a great opportunity to bring up a bigger question. You know, there's Michelle, you mentioned that there's a variety of fellowships that graduate students can apply for, you know, from federal agencies to private foundations, but there are certain elements that when you're thinking about preparing a fellowship application, you know, you need to look at, what are the requirements. You know, all of these fellowships, they have calls for applications or whatever they're called by different agencies or foundations. So what are some elements that is important for people to look at and steps for people to take to make sure that, you know, they're applying for the right fellowships, that they have the right structure and content in the applications they're putting in?
I guess the simplest thing is, though it's very painful to read the FOA, which is what we call our funding opportunity announcements, read the FOA. Don't assume, don't go on what someone told you 2 years ago. Go on what has been the recently published FOA. Allow yourself to take some time with for me, I say print it out. I know no one prints anything out anymore, but print it out. Sit down and really go through it and really try to understand as much as you can. You know, I completely understand that the way that these are written, sometimes, especially some of the boilerplate that has to be in them, it could be a little bit confusing for people that are writing these for the first time. And so having questions once you read the FOA is very understandable. But that's the first step, is just really not trying to get an understanding of what is needed in the application from just a paragraph or from just an email that someone sends you, but actually sitting down and reading the funding opportunity announcement itself. The other thing is that a lot of different NIH institutes, and also I would say a lot of funders, have really gotten into doing webinars or technical assistance workshops. And so trying to stay abreast of that, looking at the different institutes or funding agencies' websites to see when they may be having them, and also using some of these bigger meetings to ask those questions in person. So like Society for Neuroscience is a good opportunity for a lot of the neuroscientists to come and to ask and to be very specific about the questions.
Michelle, can I ask you a question, even though I'm not applying for one of these because I'm too old? Do you guys, I know NIAID does this, and I think NIGMS does too, which is to put applications where the PIs have given permission for the example applications to be there for the different mechanisms. Do you guys do that?
No, I link to NIAID and I use theirs.
Okay.
They're wonderful. And they give examples of diversity F31s, general F31s, even RO ones, and they really do a nice.
Even SBIRs. This morning I was looking at an SBIR application, and my postdoc, who's actually from San Juan, he's starting a company, and we went to NIAID, and he was able to get a good SBIR application example. So that's something that I would generally say. One of the things after we hang up today, you now know us, you can contact us, and with the permission of our fellows. For example, I'd be happy to give you, I had one fellow who was outstanding. She got a perfect 10 in her F32 to come to my lab and did very, very well. And, be happy to send you the application. Well, I'm sure we'll have to sanitize some issues. But in general, those are good examples. And again, the closer they are, because things do change, the FOAs do change. So
yeah, and so you just have to know that. But I think they do a very good job of staying pretty current too, and trying to pull old ones and refresh new ones. And so that's why we haven't even bothered, because it is a lot to redact and
absolutely
permissions and OMB clearance but yeah. NIAID is a great resource. I think they call them like grant writing tutorials.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something very quickly about this? And I think I know what you guys are talking about. A lot of the universities, if they have, a lot of the graduate programs will have some sort of program where you can get applications from previous applicants from that institution that have been successful for all the levels. So from F31, F32s, for KO1s. And so, reach out in case, if you haven't heard about it, reach out to your, whoever runs your PhD program to see, is it them or other offices at your institution that can facilitate that. I know at UNC, they have a training program in biomedical and biological sciences, and they provide a lot of the resources and workshops for students on that. And many schools also have K writing clubs and F31 or F32 writing clubs where you can get feedback from your peers and from other faculty, other than your advisor and mentors, etc., for significant aims in your grant.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it's been already mentioned. I may have missed it, but you can contact program officers to ask about, after reading the FOA. Don't email somebody to be like, I have a question, and here's this general question. If it is on the FOA, I can guarantee you the program officer is gonna pull their hair and be like, why don't you read the FOA? So obviously, the FOAs sometimes are really long and some of them can be confusing, but make sure that you read the FOA or the call for proposal or the instructions for the fellowship application. And then after you've read that carefully, if you have questions, for the most part, program officers, all of the program officers I've ever talked to are very happy to answer questions about the application. I mean, and Michelle, you can certainly speak to this more than I can. So contact your program officer, but also look at your peers, not just for writing groups, but who has received this fellowship that you're applying for. Is there anybody? Talk to them about the process, what they felt made them successful, ask if they'd be willing to share some of their materials, to provide you with feedback on your application. Also ask either your mentor, people in your committee, faculty in your department, or just mentors that are outside your institution that are in your network. Ask them, can you review this? I mean, definitely have at least one more person read everything, not just your research proposal, but if you have to write personal statements and all of that, have at least one other person review those things and give you feedback. But sometimes faculty are asked, and other professionals are asked to be on reviewing committees for these fellowships. Like, I know I recently threw my name in the hat to be a reviewer for the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, because I want to understand it. As somebody who works with graduate students constantly, I want to understand the process from the other side. I know it from the students' perspectives because I applied and I got the fellowship, but talk to people in your network who have been reviewers and can give you insight to what do reviewers look for when they're reviewing applications.
And so, Monica, just to piggyback on the contacting your program director, I really should have mentioned that it's really important once you've identified what mechanism or what funding opportunity that you think you're going to apply to reach out. But most times it's better to reach out via email than a phone call. Via email with just some bullets or a draft of your specific aims, nothing as flushed out, but just, this is what I intend to submit. This is the research area that I'm thinking about, and send it. Most times if it's our institute, you can always send it to me and I'll guide it to someone else. But if you go on the webpage, say it's NIMH or other institutes, there's always a training office or someone that you can first send it to if you can't find the specific program director who oversees that scientific portfolio. The other place is in the funding opportunity announcement itself. There will be a contact list, and in that contact list, it will have the people that you're supposed to reach out to for scientific questions. But that is really important, especially for funding opportunity announcements that don't go across all of NIH. So for example, for most of the diversity programs in my office, like the K22, the K01, we're the only ones signed on to it. And so though you may be fabulous and great, if you're doing research that isn't a fit for my institute, it's really heartbreaking, but an application will come in and I can't accept it because it's not part of the NINDS mission. Even though it's neuroscience, it's not an area that our institute is focused on, and therefore I can't accept it. And so that's very heartbreaking and it's frustrating. And with mechanisms like that, where we're the only ones that are participating in the participating institute, that's at the top of every FOA will list the institutes that are participating. And if we're the only ones there, I can't even transfer it to another institute. That's the other question that I'll get is, well, if you can't take it, I spent all this time writing it, why can't you just send it over to NIMH? And it's like, that's not the way it works. Everything that comes in to the NIH as an application has to be identified to a funding opportunity announcement. And so just spend the time to do that and to reach out to your program director. It saves you the heartache of that, but then it's also, you want to get to know your program director. You want to form a relationship and you want them to get to know you. I mean, you won't be going out for high tea or anything probably, but it's nice to have that name recognition. And this person scientifically is going to be a part of your network. And so we're here to help.
I have a quick question about the program director statement. So I've kind of had a little bit of trouble with that. So are you basically saying the main purpose of contacting your program director is just to make sure that your application is appropriate for the institute that you're sending it to, and that's it?
Not at all.
Okay. Well, okay, so here's another thing. So from older graduate students that I've spoken to, they said that they worked a lot so I need to resubmit my grant, and when they resubmitted their grant, they said that their program director was like really helpful and trying to like help them guide along their application. And I like, for me, I don't really know how they could be helpful in terms of like, you know, because like you said, it's not like you can hand your application and have them read it, right? It's more like asking if your subject matter kind of fits in with the mission, and if there's like, I guess, anything else you could enhance your application with, right? But then again, like when I say it like that, or when I think about it like that, it also seems like similar to the FOA statement, like why don't I just read the mission and then like think about it and see if it matches, right? So like where is sort of that connection there? Does that make sense?
Not entirely, but
okay, so like what are the
I guess the thing is that you don't want to put that on yourself to make the determination of if it fits the NINDS mission by you just reading it. You want confirmation from someone who actually works there to say, okay, this fits the mission, because people run into trouble because it is tricky, right?
Yeah.
In terms of those mission statements, for example, something like autism, it could go to NINDS if you're just saying autism, NINDS, NIMH, even NICHD. But once you start to barrow down a little bit in terms of the research questions that you're actually asking, then it starts to split apart. And a program director will be able to tell you, well, if you're looking at the neural substrates of this, then this is me. If it's not, then it's this person. But I would also say that it's nice to have a conversation with the program director, because they also might know of other opportunities that you don't know about. And I mean, it just comes back to the fact that you don't know what you don't know, right? And so someone who is working and that's their job to examine that research area, and they see hundreds of applications in that research area, it benefits you to ask, you know, how is the research that I'm proposing, is this a priority? Because it could be a fit, but maybe not a priority, right? That's a difference. So that would be my recommendation, is that it's never a waste of your time to reach out to your program director before and then after, once you get the summary statement. We had mentioned before, sometimes it's really hard for people to read what the summary statement is truly saying, because there's a lot of code words, and good doesn't really mean good. You know, if someone says it's good, not outstanding, you know. And so there are things that, especially as a first-time applicant, you're just not going to read into that. So reaching out to your program director to say, you know, a lot of program directors listen in to the review, and so they can give you more of a, I guess, gestalt of what the room was like and how you really fared. And so those were being my arguments. Like, no one will force you to contact your program director, but I really think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I have something to add to that very quick. So I had the opportunity to contact my program director ahead of time, and we talked by the phone like for 30 minutes. Then we met at the conference. So something that I was very worried about was the question that I made recently about my young PI, and she was the one who told me, find a commenter, you know. And then something that I was worried about was my own research. I was like, should I focus more on sex differences, or should I go like these other, like topic, and she was like, you know, sex differences is extremely hot in our institute, so I will completely suggest you go in that route. So it was an excellent opportunity to meet her in person and even by phone. Very helpful.
Yeah, I wanted to bring in Paola.
Wait, real quick, hold on. Okay, I've been trying to contact my program director, and he's just not responsive. Who is the next person, like second in command, that I could go to? Any suggestions? And then we can move on. I realize it's quite specific.
So I guess, I mean, you could always email me. We can talk about it, but there is really no second in command. And sometimes it could just be bad timing in terms of other issues going on and just, you know, other things.
All right. I wanted to bring in Paola and to take advantage of the last 10 minutes or so that we have together, since she had to join us a bit late. She had, as a graduate student, she had fellowships, but she recently also went through the process of applying for a I think it was a K01.
K01.
Yeah, a K01 fellowship or award. And so I wanted to, since she went recently through this process of applying for this grant, I wanted her to share a bit about the process and, you know, some of the strategies that she took that made her competitive and eventually successful in getting this money. And if you can also tell us a bit about what is a K01 so that people have a sense of what kind of grant that is.
Yeah, I think the more you apply to things, the better. So you know, as a grad student, I applied for the NSF award, which I didn't get, and then I applied for the F31 twice. So the first time I didn't get it, and then the second time I got it. And obviously that already helps to know sort of what's the structure of a grant and you know, the research part of it that eventually gets me to the K01. I also had the opportunity to work on some R01s with, you know, my PhD advisor as a grad student. But the K01, it's called a Mentor Research Scientist Development Award. It's meant to facilitate the transition from postdoc to PI. It's different from the K90.
Can you say what institute it is? Because
NIMH.
It all depends on what institute it is.
Yeah, NIMH. Yeah, and so I applied, and then the way that it's structured, at least at the NIMH, at the time that I applied, is that it has like a big component of it is research, but almost as important, if you know, it's pretty much equally important, the type of training that you're gonna get out of the K01. So it's meant to give you some independence and to start, you know, again, that transition from postdoc to PI. And so you get support for your salary, for benefits, and then you get like $50,000 a year, at least at the NIMH, for your research for up to 4 years, which is what I applied and got. And then the focus of, in my case, I came from a neuroscience background as a PhD student, and I went for my postdoc to do postdoc in genomics of psychiatric disorders. And so the main goal of my K01 is to gain new skills for the analysis of genomics data. So like right now, I'm at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory on a 2-week course on statistical analysis of functional genomics data. And which honestly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the K01, because these courses are very expensive. And so I think the main strategy is to first have a good advisor for your postdoc, have someone, a mentor who's very supportive and who's cognizant of the need to move on from your postdoc in like a timely fashion. And also to be, you know, if you have a good advisor, they will also push you gently to apply for other things as a postdoc. So I did apply, in my first 3 years, I applied for like a UNC postdoctoral fellowship. I applied for like the Burroughs Wellcome Fund Diversity Fellowship Program. And I applied, I think, for the L'Oreal Women in Science. Again, I didn't get any of those, but you build up on your, you know, your grant writing skills, you polish your ideas. And so by the time we sat down to write the K01, it was, you know, it was like a short but very intense, like I would say like 2-month process. And so we, you know, my PI is, you know, he's very good at grant writing, and our lab has had several KO1 trainees. So there's already sort of like a standard way in which we approach the process of writing a KO1. So we start with like bullet points for significant aims, and then we will go, we plan out how we want to structure the grant and what are going to be, in my case, what are going to be my training goals. And then there's a lot of just going back and forth between him and I about like, so how to, get it to the point that it's ready for submission. And so I spend a lot of time, just thinking about where I wanted to go and what skills I wanted to gain during the period of the KO1. So such as, statistical, new statistical skills, getting exposure to different types of mentors. So that's one of the main benefits. The main benefits of the KO1 is not only your mentor, so you have to assemble a group of mentors. And in my case, I have someone who does biostatistics and computational science. I have someone who has I have another mentor who has very extensive functional genomics experience. I have someone who has extensive experience with chromatin conformation capture, which is sort of one of the techniques that I'm doing during my KO1. And a psychiatrist, because I am working on psychiatric genetics, but I didn't train as a physician. So the goal is that I would shadow a psychiatrist and see firsthand how they diagnose and treat psychiatric patients. And so, and I've shared my KO1, like especially the training. I think like the research aims are very specific to your lab. And that's something that, you work with your lab and your advisor. But the training aims, I've shared them with several people because you have to have a very clear timeline and a very clear plan of what you want to get out of this award. And I will say, like, I was trying to decide whether to go for the K99 or the KO1 when I was applying. And I think in most cases, the K99 is a lot more competitive than the KO1. And I'm maybe mistaken, maybe like an institute by institute thing. But I had like a 1-year-old at the time that I was applying, and I wanted to make it, if I could get it on the first shot, I wanted to try to get it on the first shot, which is what ended up happening. And so my advisor he was sort of like, it's up to you. And so I chose to go down that path. And I'm very grateful. I've been in the award for 1 year, and it's been a very productive first year for the award. So yeah, any questions that you have on that, or later on, I also, about the transition to the postdoc, let me know.
Yeah, I think you brought an important point towards the end that I don't think we've touched upon, is like when deciding what award to apply for, like what things you have to think about, like you had considerations in terms of looking at, realistically considering how competitive can I be for this award or for this fellowship versus the other. You also had family considerations. And so I was hoping that in maybe the last few minutes that we have, you and as well as Mariano and Michelle, like what are your thoughts on how do you decide what fellowship to apply for?
Well, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is driven by what you want to do long term, right? I mean, I think, so I understand that you have to gauge the competitiveness, but the only guarantee not to get something is not to apply for it. Now, I think one has to be practical. I'm not disagreeing with Paola that you want to be practical, but I think you have to really look, for example, I have written letters of recommendation for, I think, 6 people who got the K99 R00. And it's a great award, but it has some restrictions. It doesn't give you as much flexibility as the KO1 in some ways because of things that you have to do at certain times. So I think you have to look at your career and say, okay, what do I want to do for the next 5-6 years? And then I think look very carefully, as Michelle said, at the FOAs and see what the requirements are for each of these awards. And decide. I mean, if you are 100% convinced that you want to go get an assistant professorship within a year, to a year and 2 years or so, then maybe the K99 is the way to go. I think that, again, another thing Michelle said that I go to very few institutes for my own funding, right? GMS, NIAID, NCI are the 3 mainstays for So I don't look at some of the other institutes, although I was just telling Michelle we are about to put an R01 that may go to NIH. It's a multiple sclerosis R01. So it may end up going to NIH. I don't know. So look very carefully at what the institutes are prioritizing and how they, because they're, Michelle, I'll let you talk about this because I know you know a lot more. The K01s can be very different in different ones, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. I mean, that's why I just wanted you to get the institute name out as you were describing it, because for the K01, it's, for example, at NINDS, just to make things very simple, we have a postdoc K01, which is for postdocs open to all that don't qualify for the F32, that are doing a continuation of research. So that's a postdoc K01. And then we have the K01 in my office, which is the diversity K01, which is for faculty, someone that is less than 3 years in their first tenure track position, right? Very different career stages, very different eligibility, but called a K01. And so we do not, I apologize on behalf of NIH that we do not do a great job with the naming of things, because a K01 doesn't really mean a K01. And so what happens is that people will, have colleagues and will have heard, and they'll think a K01 means a certain thing, and they'll run off and just jet set ahead and haven't really read the FOA. And so that's what I just come back to. And I saw that Monica sent something from OER. The NIH OER has a K kiosk, and there you can tell them about yourself, your number of years, and it should give you some suggested FOAs that you can look at. But still look at the FOA. Even that isn't a perfect way to identify funding opportunities. And
I'll say, well,
okay.
I applied 2 years ago, and so I know in the past, especially in the past year, there's been a lot of changes in the K01, where like at NCI, for example, they changed, the F31 is either before or like right when you start your postdoc, and then you only have, a certain number of years to, for apply for the K01 and so forth. For me, I was sort of not ready, to move on in a year or two, because like right now I'm like getting out like the big papers this year. So the timeline for the K01 also made more sense with where I was and where I was going. I knew I wanted to go to a faculty position, but I knew that because of, where my research was and the research goals that I had as a, before I finished my, my training and transition to my own lab, it made the most sense. The good thing is if my plan is to apply for faculty positions next year, and I can, if I find a position, I can take the K01 with me, and which is, it's a great thing. So it is portable in some sense. But yeah, it didn't have the restrictions in that sense that the K99 has, where you have a year 2 max to secure a position and move on.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. So I would like to again thank Michelle, Mariano, and Paola for your time and for all of your advice. I'd also like to thank Rebecca, Natalie, and Nicole for being our discussants and for all of the resources that they put together and sent to the group ahead of time. We've shared in the chat some additional links, and we can send you a transcription of, or at least those links, so that you can have them. So we've provided some additional suggestions. So, takeaways from the conversation: look at the FOA, look at the requirements for the grant fellowship that you are applying for. Really have mentors, advisors, people that can be sounding boards from, the ideas, the science that you're proposing to the writing, it is really, really important to get feedback in multiple dimensions of the fellowship and the grant that you're writing. Don't be afraid to contact your program officers, program directors, and they're there to help you. And I think it's really, really important also to think about what is it that you want to do. In the long term, when deciding for what kind of fellowships, particularly I think as you're getting towards the end of graduate school, is particularly important to think about what is it that I want to do in my career in the long term. But I would say that even, I think when we are training, we often think about grants and how important they are in an academic setting. But even if you're not going into academia, getting the experience of writing, of getting funded, it's an incredibly helpful exercise. Regardless of where you go, you're probably going to have to get funding. And if you don't have to get funding, you're lucky, but you still going to have to sell ideas. And get people on board to work with you and to convince them that what you're doing is worthy. And definitely writing a grant is a great exercise to learn how to do that. I think the last thing is you have to have a thick skin because, success rates unfortunately are low, but always take that, take the no's as an opportunity to learn. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for being with us tonight, and we will see you next time.
Monica, one last thing.
Yes,
you
go ahead.
We run out of time, but you guys, now you know us, so you have our emails, so we don't, you can always contact us for questions or advice or examples. Okay. And good luck, everybody.
Good luck.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.